but we want to move this program along. One of the things my name is Jim Blanchard, by the way, along with Jim Peterson, I co-chair the And I'm here to tell you that 115 years ago, a Canadian, yes, a Canadian named James Naismith invented basketball. His son was shooting baskets in their garage in Ottawa, and he said, you know, he had a kind of a basket like an orange basket, and he said, why don't we cut the bottom out so once you score, it doesn't take so long to keep playing. Now, the Americans will tell you that he invented basketball in Springfield, Massachusetts, or as you say in Nova Scotia, Massachusetts. But actually it was in Ottawa. And of course, I say this because tonight Ohio State's playing Cincinnati. Michigan State is playing Louisville, as they say in Kentucky, Louisville. But the truth is, we're going to be done in time to watch all that, so I don't want anyone to worry, because Ambassador Gary Doer is a gigantic sports fan, and he's rooting for Michigan State University. He takes no position on Ohio State, Cincinnati, but my parents went to Ohio State, so what can I tell you? But I really, on behalf of our Canada-U.S. Law Institute, our deans, who you're going to hear from, Ian Scott and Lawrence Mitchell, and many others on the staff, we want to welcome you to our 35th annual conference. It's named after Henry King Jr., who was a distinguished attorney in Cleveland and the United States. As a prosecutor at Nuremberg. We founded this in our home. The anchor institutions are the University of Western Ontario, now known as Western in Canada, and of course Case and Western Reserve right here in the great city of Cleveland. So we're happy to be here. I'm going to get closer to this. I should know by all these years. But anyway, a year ago, February, the Prime Minister of Canada and the President of the United States announced the Beyond the Border initiative. It's actually a really exciting thing. That's our conference theme this year, is really the new perimeter initiative. Will security trump trade? I can tell you that trade is security, so we can finish the conference and just enjoy each other. But the truth is, we have a star-studded lineup of speakers and presenters and panelists. This is the gold standard of U.S.-Canada, or should I say Canada-U.S. thinking and law and policy. And we are thrilled that you're here. Our guest speakers, we're honored that you're here. And for all the guests who are here to participate, thank you for coming. It's important. Important things are going to be discussed and followed up on. We have high-level government officials who are in charge of making things work. You're going to hear from our two ambassadors. I'm not going to get into a long introduction right now, but I do want to thank Western in London, Ontario, where my family lived at one point, and Case Western Reserve for their leadership. It's really important. I also want to give a very special thank you to the Canadian Consul General in Detroit, the most important city in the entire world, Roy Norton. He's not rooting for the Red Wings yet, but we're going to make him do it before he leaves. Anyway, do they still play hockey in Toronto? No, I can tell we have many of Canadians here. Going to play in Ann Arbor. We have students here from Traverse City and Ann Arbor, by the way, but your consulate has been fabulous. We thank you. We thank the consulate staff. One of them has been trying to manage me for 30 years, George Casteris, but other than that. I mentioned the Consul General and the Consulate because they are sponsors and hosts of this dinner, so we do thank you. There are some previous consuls general that I want to acknowledge. I'm not going to acknowledge everybody. Everybody here is a celebrity. But I do acknowledge some of the people I've worked with, you know, like former consul general to Detroit, John Tennant, excuse me. U.S. Consul General to Toronto and Ontario and parts west, Jessica LaCroix, thank you for being with us. I want to also acknowledge our new, where is he? Our new executive director, David Mocan. Where is David? There he is. David, thank you. Now, at some point, you're going to acknowledge the staff that's helped out here, so we need to know that. This is going to be a very, you can see, it's a very successful conference. It's going to be very enlightening. We're going to enjoy it. We're happy that David Crane and Chris Sands are back with us. They've chaired this for a number of years. Other people are going to be introduced, but I do want to, there's just a couple people that I've worked with that I need to thank, and that is my advisors, Rick Newcomb and William Miner, helped me on Cooley or the Canada-U.S. lawsuit. I do thank you very much. And we also have one of our panelists and presenters that I worked with when I served in Ottawa, Anne McClellan. She's had more jobs than Elizabeth Taylor has had husbands. Actually a professor and dean of a law school, She was dean of the University of Alberta Law School. She became a member of Parliament. She was Minister of Justice, Minister of Natural Resources. What it was, Minister of Security, Deputy, oh, there was Deputy Prime Minister, so what, you know, who cares? But anyway, if we say can't hold a steady job, but we really are delighted you're here. She came from Alberta. Guests who are going to be introduced. I mean, we have our Admiral from the Coast Guard. You're going to be one of our keynoters tomorrow night. Thank you, Admiral Parks. Thank you. There are others that I've missed, but I'm sure I can trust you. You will be acknowledged. But the truth is, everyone here is a celebrity. And the people here at Case Western have worked very hard. Again, thank you, Michael Sharp. Have worked very hard on making this a success. I am now going to introduce, we're going to bring out the dessert, right? Keep pouring the drinks, whatever you do. We're with Canadians. I've never met a crowd that drank more than those people in Ottawa, other than Washington, D.C. Anyway, I have the privilege of introducing a dear friend of mine, actually a family friend since 1985, which sounds like a short time ago to some of you and a long time ago to the students, but Heather and Jim Peterson were our first guests at the ambassador's residence in Ottawa, and there's a long story behind that, but at one point Jim Peterson was the longest serving member of Parliament. And so we wouldn't say he's a Methuselah of Ottawa, but he sure has seen a lot. And he's been a wonderfully dedicated public servant, a friend of the U.S., a friend of Canada, a leader on everything from banking and finance to international trade as trade minister. He's my dear friend, and he's going to introduce the very outstanding ambassador to the United States from Canada, who we'll talk about later. But I want to bring up to you our friend and my co-chair, Jim Peterson.
Well, Jimmy, I reciprocate the feelings of friendship, personal, but also national. For those of you who didn't follow Jim's career in Ottawa very closely, let me just give you one brief glimpse of it. 1995, we were in a referendum, the second in Canada, and 3 weeks before the vote on separation of Quebec from Canada, the separatists were winning. Jim was ambassador to Canada at that time, and it's a well-known rule in international politics that one state does not interfere in the internal affairs of another state. Jim broke that rule, and he got President Clinton to come to Canada and speak before our Parliament, where the President talked about the U.S.'s abiding friendship with that great, united Canada. We squeaked through that vote by 51,000 votes. Jimmy, you saved Canada. Now, Jimmy's mentioned everyone in the room, but I just want to thank 4 particular people who've put so much into Kusley over the years from Canada, members of our executive committee, James McElroy, Mike Robinson, Larry Herman, and Selma Lusenberg. These people have been coming here for years and they've just made an outstanding contribution. I'm just lucky to be part of their team here. Now to our main event tonight, Ambassador Doer. He is known extremely well to Canadians, but for those of you who do not know him as well as we do, I'd like to give you a short list of some of his accomplishments. Before he entered public life, he was the superintendent of the Manitoba Youth Centre. He was president of the Manitoba Government Employees Association, a director of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and a governor of the University of Manitoba. In 1986, he joined the NDP and was elected that very year, made Minister of Urban Affairs, responsible for Crown investments, and the Minister responsible for the Liquor Control Act. I would that I had followed in your footsteps, sir. When the Premier resigned in 1988, 2 years later, Mr. Doer was the first candidate to announce to succeed him, and supported by a host of his colleagues in Parliament and in government. He became the leader of the official opposition, which he became. In 1999, he led the New Democrats to victory on a platform of balanced budget, debt repayment, a freeze on taxes, shorter wait lines for health care, and banning political donations from corporations and unions. And this is from a social democrat. He was elected premier in 2003 and 2007 as well. 3 terms. Even the Winnipeg Free Press, never friendly to the NDP, asked voters to support him. While premier, he balanced every one of his budgets, even in 2009 when the rest of the world was pumping money on deficit budgets onto the world because of the Great Recession. This is an incredible record. His first budget removed 15,000 low-income Manitobans from tax rolls. He gave tax cuts of $150 million over 3 years, and further tax cuts in 2003, 2005, and 2007, all the while spending more on health care and education. He was a progressive leader who believes in fundamental rights. 2 years before the Liberal government in Ottawa brought in same-sex marriage, he made full adoptive rights available for gay and lesbian couples. He introduced civil oversight for the Manitoba Police, a strong and consistent supporter of the Kyoto Accord and a North American cap and trade program. He rejected a call by his own party members to ban replacement workers in labor disputes. He banned MLAs from crossing the floor to another party They must sit as an independent until the next election or else resign. And he has been a keen and avid supporter of the Kelowna Accord and reprimanded our Prime Minister Stephen Harper severely for having cancelled it. On Canada-US relations, he's been a vocal opponent of American country origin of labeling, Buy American, the need for passports to cross the border. As Premier, he created a biomedical corridor with Minnesota to promote research, capital investment, and technological development. He has been a fierce defender of the NAFTA. And he sold Manitoba around the world, leading trade delegations to Russia, Germany, Israel, India, China, Mexico, Philippines, Iceland, and of course, the US. In 2008, a poll was taken in Canada, and Premier Doer enjoyed an 81% approval rating. Now, Premier, I never got that high a rating in all my years in politics, even when it was only my family that was voting. Perhaps the greatest compliment from my point of view that was ever paid to Premier Doer came from a former NDP MLA. He called him, he is a small L liberal. At the very top of his game, in 2009, Premier Doer announced that he would be resigning, and in a stroke of incredible genius, Prime Minister Harper appointed him Canada's ambassador to the United States of America. Mr. Doer, what an honor and privilege to have had your leadership in Canada, and what an honor and a privilege to have you with us here tonight.
Introduction, Minister, and to all the people assembled this evening. I just want you to know that my darling wife is my pollster, and so all those high poll results have to be taken with a little bit of a jaundiced look, but it's a wonderful introduction. I want to thank the good Governor, Ambassador, Co-Chair, for his wonderful comments, preceding my comments. The good advantage of that is there's nobody else I have to pay tribute to in my comments. So thank you very much, Governor, and it's great to work with you. We want to thank you very much for having Stevie Eiserman as the general manager of the Canadian men's Olympic hockey team. Thank you very, very much for that. We have to have fun. It's a sports night. There's lots of basketball games here. I want to thank the Admiral for hosting the Consul General, the Ambassador Jacobson, and I for lunch today. We thought the residence in Ottawa was spectacular, that the U.S. Ambassador resides in, overlooking all the land of Canada. Of course, the embassy in Washington that we reside in is at center ice in between the Capitol building and the White House. But nobody could touch the Admiral's office. When we were there, we could see Canada from his window. We also saw Daryl Hannah kayaking to Toronto because she's weaned herself completely off of all fossil fuels. And the other fact that the Admiral pointed out to us is we saw, and we're pointed out, Whiskey Island. Whiskey Island. That, of course, now is a very important strategic point. And to which I said to the Admiral, I find that it's a lot easier as a Canadian ambassador to put Crown Royal in a pipeline from Texas than it is to put oil in it. So we have not... The ambassador and I had a wonderful afternoon discussing our bilateral relationship. Those of you who are worried about sovereignty and culture in Canada, I want you to know that we spent a lot of time talking about culture this afternoon. We talked about the sovereignty of culture this afternoon. And we thought the most appropriate place to recognize the sovereignty of both our countries was to spend a valuable hour together in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio. If you haven't been there, it is spectacular. So I highly recommend it. And no matter how scheduled your staff have placed you into this next 36 or 48 hours, it's just stunning. It's just wonderful. And Cleveland is beautiful. We were just so pleased to be here and have all these great meetings with the Admiral. Of course, part of this debate about sovereignty versus trade, I've been rather informed in my previous life as a premier, 99% of which I didn't achieve, but thank you very much for those comments. But when I was a premier of Manitoba, and I think this applies to every elected leader in every political party in either one of our countries that I've ever encountered. And that is life and limb for the citizens that you represent always comes ahead of any other economic issue. So the question is a little different than that. But if I'm dealing with a flood in Manitoba as premier, and I'm told that this route is really important for trade, and there's a 3 or 2% chance that the river may have a situation where people are put in danger, you make a decision to override trade, commerce, and revenue for any risk that can be mitigated as a leader in terms of life and limb. And I think the same situation that I went through modestly is the same environment that people go through here and every day in the capitals that are so important to all the countries. The second issue that I found as the premier when we were dealing with the governors on crystal meth and how do we stop crystal meth, and at this point it was in southwestern United States, and it was moving north and then potentially north into Canada and east into other provinces. How do we make sure that people and procedures are in place so that information is shared and people that were going to spread this horrible affliction, particularly young people, were prevented from doing so, either state to state, country to country, province to province. And so I have always believed that it's not a human right to cross a border. Sometimes you get the debate about whether you have a crossover fly list available to another country. You always have a choice. You don't have to go to another country. You don't have to fly over another country. In the case of Manitoba, if you decide to go to Puerto Vallarta and you don't want to hand over your name to somebody else, you can actually fly from Winnipeg to Beijing and fly back from Beijing to Puerto Vallarta, or you can take a direct flight and put your name in ahead of time. You have choices. And I've always believed that, and as a premier, maybe that's not politically correct in saying so, but I just believe that that is the model that we should operate under. I also believe that it's interesting as premier and now as ambassador to listen to the media discussion and some of the political discussion on the border. A border report comes out, and allegedly somebody might skate, some terrorist might skate along a frozen river from Canada to the United States and cross the Canadian border. And that, therefore, is a risk. And I have never, in my life, when I've traveled from Canada in a car to the United States, crossed and visited the Canadian border. I've always actually visited the American border. I always cross at the American border, and it's kind of interesting how it's always the Canadian border when, in fact, we don't even start with a fundamental factual comment about how we're managing our relationship together. After 9/11 and before 9/11, I believed in a perimeter view of how we should manage risk. I've always believed that the example of NORAD that was established 55 years ago is the model we should use. So it made sense to me, then as a premier and now as an ambassador, to try to take that model that works and apply it to the modern challenges of risk that we have. Modern challenges that were there before 9/11, modern challenges that are obviously evident and there after 9/11, and modern challenges that are evolving in a very, very clear way between our countries. I never understood why we didn't want to have a perimeter approach to managing risk and managing the life and limbs of people on either side of our border. And so I thought it was important that when we look at even the Olympics, where air security and maritime security was provided out of Colorado for the people of Washington State and British Columbia through a coordinated effort between our two countries, that this is the model to look at for how we manage our risk to people and how we can make trade more efficient within that risk. Now, in saying that, we're in very good shape with the Prime Minister and the President, who have a very good working relationship. Ambassador Jacobson and I are blessed in our jobs and in our tasks to have people that have a very good, positive, and honest relationship. It's straight. They're both straight shooters. The issues are discussed. We know what the issues are, and part of the issues are the border and the agreement we just reached. But we're also blessed as two countries to have two people that go into the Oval Office or go into the Parliament of Canada when they meet, that are actually spending more time discussing issues of security in the world than they are on some of the bilateral issues that might be in the news. We have been very fortunate when we went to the Oval Office in February, where we were discussing other countries in NATO, countries like Sweden, countries under the Arab League, where we all came together under a Canadian general who was trained in Colorado Springs and Florida and had the ability to work with all the multilateral forces to protect the innocent people that had been threatened by the Gaddafi regime and by the departed Gaddafi himself in terms of threats to those people. And so that is what we're discussing together. And then we go through the checklist, you know, softwood lumber, you've heard some of these issues, you know. I mean, I think there's people, I think some of the softwood lumber lawyers, no disrespect to anybody here, are going to be like the soldiers of Malaysia after the Second World War was over, 25 years later, not surrendering to this peace agreement that we're eventually going to get. But I'm just having fun at your expense, sir. But it's, we keep fighting and we keep resolving it, hopefully. But, you know, they discuss more and more the issues of international security. They're going to be in Korea this week, discussing the success of the nuclear summit that the President hosted last May. And of course, when we got to the White House to announce Beyond the Border and announce regulatory reform in December, the discussion again was, what are we doing post-Libya? What can we do together on Syria? How can we help bring things together with Israel and the Palestinian situation? What should we do on the European debt crisis? And what, of course, would we recommend on to preempt or not to preempt with the capacity of Iran developing and evolving more and more and its risk it presents to the world and the real and apparent risk it presents to Israel. So I just want you to know in this discussion on bilateral issues that when the two people get together, and we have very good meetings, but there's always this issue or that issue in the media, and there always will be. They have a very good relationship on how we protect the life and limb of people around the world and the people in our two countries. And it's very, very satisfying for the two of us to have that privilege to be there. And you wouldn't be surprised to hear anything else about our relationship. Now, Beyond the Border is a good agreement. A lot of the discussions we've had over the years have been discussions. And both the ambassador and I, and the president and the prime minister, both wanted to take some of the gaps that were there between Canada and the United States that represented a risk to trade and a risk to life and limb, and take a common sense approach to closing those gaps using a model like perimeter security in Oregon. You know, why should we have one technology on luggage inspection in Saskatoon and another standard in Billings, Montana? Why should we have one container protocol in Halifax and another one in Boston? Why should we have one radio frequency system in Windsor and another frequency system in Cleveland? And so it really is managing stuff that we should have managed a while ago. It's common sense changes. And some of the changes we're looking at, Ambassador Jacobson, I think, said to the Admiral today, when I mentioned the shipwriter program, people think we should have already done this years ago. Why shouldn't we have, instead of buying 2 boats that we can't afford, one ship that we can afford, and have RCMP officers and Coast Guard officers on the same ship? It just makes such good sense. It just makes good sense now. I think what we're talking about is really sensible, and it really does speak to the values of Canadians to have a sensible approach on managing risk. The other reason why we have to manage risk, we have to use technology for trusted traveler, and we have to use technology on other areas to be more efficient at the border. We're trying to work in combination with regulatory reform to have a system where you inspect it once and you accept it twice. Doesn't mean you lose your sovereignty to randomly check something now and then. But why should we check carrots in one country and then the other, or oranges or peaches, or, you know, Crown Royal or deodorant or Ambassador Jacobson's Cheerios? You know, we should have much more alignment, if you will, of trade and inspections. Why shouldn't we be spending our time with valued food inspectors looking at countries that we may not be totally satisfied with on deploying food inspectors? And why would we want to plug up the border inspecting and inspecting? You know, we already come down here for a Big Mac, and you already come up there for Boston pizza. Just kidding. And that's a joke. I still owe the Ambassador pizza with the Boston Bruins winning the Stanley Cup. But it's really, really a sensible way to go. And we'll be eventually more efficient when we get all this work done. Finally, we have risks that are really, really important that are also need to be managed beyond the border. New risks that are really present, cybersecurity risks. We're working now with the United States on critical infrastructure, and this is again beyond the border to get a policy in place. It's not the traditional, you know, how many beer do you have in your six-pack to, you know, whether you can cross the border. You know, it's really, really important to get it right. And domestic terrorist threats are also extremely important for their 2 countries. I think 43 out of the last 48 cases in the United States were domestic terrorist threats. Born, raised in the United States, and then obviously in a situation where they were very dangerous to U.S. citizens. And we have the group in Canada also identified as a domestic terrorist risk. Again, all that work goes on beyond the border. So I'd just like to say that we have a great working relationship with Canada and the United States. We work together on world security issues. The Prime Minister and the President will be together. Chris Sands and I were just going over. They'll be together in Korea. They'll be together at the North American Leaders Summit. They'll be together at the Meeting of the Americas. They'll be together at the G8 meeting in Washington. And they'll be together at the NATO meeting in Chicago. They'll be together at least that many times over the next 8 weeks. And yes, they'll be discussing the bilateral issues of Crown Royal coming from Gimli, Manitoba to the United States, but they'll also be discussing how we can keep our world safer and how we can protect the life and limb of citizens that we're all responsible for. So thank you very, very much for your time tonight.
Ambassador Ambassador Doer said he'd be happy to take a few questions or comments. Yes.
Questions, no speech.
Don't forget in Canada, it's question period, not answer period.
We all know that this is a very unique relationship. Do you feel that the values of the two countries are becoming closer or are they becoming further apart?
Well, I think by definition, the values are the same. The governance system is different. Some of the economic realities are different. Some of the programs that have been put in place are different. The how-to is different. But the values are the same. The belief in democracy, the ability to determine, the desire always to have freedom of the press, the desire to have freedom of religion, our work together in places to ensure, like Afghanistan, to ensure that our citizens on either side of the border are protected. I think that the values are very much the same. I've always felt that. There's so many people in Manitoba. We have the Icelandic community. We're talking about Iceland. We have the Icelandic community that came to our region of the world, and half of them went to North Dakota, half of them went to Gimli, Manitoba. And I can pronounce Eastland Dingadangar, and it's very important in Manitoba to be able to say that. But I think the values are very, very much the same. I just believe that.
Anybody else?
Yes.
Yes.
On Mr. Ambassador, on life and limb, we're at a table with two very young university students who are at the beginning of their career. You were here with the Ambassador Jacobson of the United States. Where do you see our comparative advantage globally in the years to come? And if you had a son or daughter at a university age, what career would you suggest your child go into in North America?
Well, the first reality. Well, the first reality I would have, the one thing you are with two daughters, you never tell them whether you like their boyfriend or not, because that's the kiss of death, apparently. I don't know whether that's true or not. So, I'm always very leery of giving my daughters advice, because there's a little Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in all of our children. If you tell me to go, I'll stay. And a little bit of that contrarian nature with parents. I have one daughter who has chosen, she's getting her journalism degree. So obviously, as a politician, a daughter going over to the dark side, I have no influence whatsoever in her choices. But I'm very, very proud of her. So, so young people, I would have only one bit of advice. Live your dream. Do not let anybody say you can't do anything.
You're here.
Live your
You're
dream.
here.
And, for those of us have an office like the Admiral, or a house like the Ambassador, or an embassy like I do, we're proof that if you live your dream, you never know what will happen. So go for it. Reach for the top. There's a lot of room. That's my advice to you.
The United States have, well, I think everybody will agree, is an increasingly polarized body politic. We have red states, we have blue states, we have fundamentalists, we have the liberals. The perception of the United States is you've avoided that. Not entirely, nobody avoids it entirely, but what's the difference?
Well, there is one major cultural political difference on, and maybe it goes back generations to a prime minister that said the nation has no business in the bedrooms of the public. But there is a major, but when you think about it, in Canada, conservative women, and I'm overgeneralizing, don't want the state to tell them what to do. They want the state to tell them what to do. So I'm overgeneralizing. So there's a lot less in our political discourse on some of these issues than there is in the United States. And I don't know why that's happened. over the last number of decades. I also think there's a little more anger in the United States with the bank bailouts that we went through in Canada. But beyond that, the United States has more patents than any other country in the world. They have more innovation. They have more risk-taking. I'm trying to, you know, look at what's going on with some of our Canadian entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. How do we take that? You know, we're pretty good at going from papers, all the university people, we've gone from papers to patents. We're not doing as good a job as the United States, going from papers to patents to products. So there's lots of things that you're doing way better than we are. There's areas that we're not having as part of a political debate. I actually think the American public is not as polarized as what's going on now. And when we look at, Canada looks at the European debt crisis, and we look at the deficit in the United States, we believe the United States has a way more capacity to deal with their fiscal challenges, and we also believe they will get it right. They always get it right, and that because the public will determine that they get it right. So,
I hope you're right about that.
I'm an eternal optimist.
Entrepreneurs, you know, not this president, but the last president, said the great trouble with French is they have no words in their language for entrepreneur.
No. They believe, our friends en français believe that entrepreneur is a French term, a French word, and they would argue strenuously with you on that issue, and then they would have a glass of wine with you after they were factually correcting you. So that, okay.
Ambassador, let me take you back when you were premier. You dealt a lot with governors.
Yes.
How different was your job as a premier from the job of a governor like Governor Blanchard?
I think the governors, well, I can't speak for Governor Blanchard because he was pretty smart when he became an ambassador. He took a train across Canada and he shamelessly had a press conference at every whistle stop. So I don't think he's lost a step. So I would defer to his political ability any day of the week. And I had the privilege of meeting him when I was leader of the opposition, so it was a great honor. I think the relationship between premiers and governors is maturing. There's more organizations. The New England governors and the Atlantic Canadian governors are premiers. There's the Midwestern group that meets. The Western governors and Western premiers have had great meetings. The actual entrepreneurs, governors, state legislators in provinces and states in Western Canada have an organization called Penwar that are meeting together. Companies, mayors, entrepreneurs, universities work. They have very, very formal meetings. And actually, I'd like to see the good work from premiers and governors here. You know, maybe in Cleveland, you should be inviting premiers and governors and mayors. Look at the ballast water success. The Admiral, I want to thank the Coast Guard for that common rule and your great leadership on that regard. But I actually think there's an ability to go further because trying to solve a problem from Winnipeg, phoning Ottawa, phoning Washington, Washington phoning Chicago, it's a lot easier just to build relationships up north and south. So if you were to take, and they're doing a lot of that on the West Coast right now, and I really think that that's a good model. The Great Lakes with the 8 states, 2 provinces. We were talking about this today at lunch. You know, there is, this is maybe the forum to take it to the next step, because you have got A, a great location, and B, when you look at the Great Lakes, I'm just a great believer that everybody went south a little bit with the sun, but with the shortage of water, everybody's going to be heading back to the beauty of the Great Lakes. So buy your real estate fast. So I just believe that the model works north-south, but it works with entrepreneurs, it works with mayors, it works with educational institutions. I think it's very important to keep working on it.
Could we have maybe one more, David?
What are we going to do about climate change?
Well, I think that I believe that the biggest announcement that was made and the biggest reduction in greenhouse gases that was announced by Canada and the United States got very little coverage. The biggest emitter of GHGs in both our countries was light vehicles, the vehicles we drive. The agreement that was reached, you know, and I was part of the Western Climate Initiative, California, I saw Governor Brown last week, California, Arizona, John Napolitano, Bill Richardson, provinces like British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, looked at that whole tailpipe emission standard, and it's good we don't have 63 separate emission standards for cars, light vehicles, coming together, including air conditioning. The announcement made by the EPA and the President, along with Minister Prentice and the Prime Minister, is the largest reducer of GHGs of any action we've taken, including Kyoto, in terms of GHGs. We're now working on heavy trucks. We're working on Great Lakes vessels. We're working on ocean vessels. In Canada, we're going to have increased production in oil development in the oil sands. Those emissions have gone down 40%. The Curl project will be at or below U.S. averages. That's being invested in Alberta. At the same time, if we're going to have increased production, even with decreased GHGs per barrel, we've got to do something else. And in our case, in electricity, the new protocols on coal, which, by the way, are 60 times greater emitters than the oil sands in Alberta, the policies on coal, I think, will make a major difference. I also think that natural gas in the United States is a huge advantage, not only for affordable energy in the United States, it's a huge advantage for returning some manufacturing to the United States and Canada, but it also represents a huge benefit. It's 50% below coal in terms of electricity production, and that's a huge advantage. So when I went to Pittsburgh yesterday, they felt they won the lottery. They won the lottery because they have shale gas and they have Sidney Crosby back playing. So I think we can work on I think we got to keep working industry by industry. The announcement made by Secretary Clinton and Minister Kent just a couple of weeks ago on black carbon, we've been working on that for the last 4 years. Its impact on the Arctic, on ice. So the stuff that gets announced, that's good news, never gets covered. Keystone Pipeline, it'll be covered wall to wall tonight, wall to wall tomorrow. Conflict gets coverage, as you know, in the media. Cooperation and good news doesn't get any coverage. The last announcement of the President on climate change that we're working on got one Tom Friedman article on the Sunday New York Times saying this is a really big deal.
Who else would have said it?
Hey, pardon?
Only Tom Friedman would have thought it was a really big deal.
Yeah, well, it was a big deal, in my view. You don't agree?
No, sir.
You don't believe in reducing emissions from cars is a good big deal?
There may be more important issues before society.
Well, we're actually selling more cars.
Well, that'll mean more emissions, won't it?
No, it would be less cars from another place. So I respectfully disagree with you. I thought it was a good announcement.
I think your accounting is off.
Hey, pardon?
I think your accounting is strange. If the cars are coming from wherever they're coming from, if there are more cars, there are more emissions.
Well, if you have 50%, if you have a constant amount of cars, and more are being built into North America for the North American market than were built before, and you have a 50% reduction in emissions and fuel utilization in the cars 5 years from now than you do today, you'll use less fuel. And the United States is actually using less fuel per capita today with some of the emission standards. So I believe in clean air and I believe in clean water, but I drive a car. So I'd like a car that has reduced the emissions, and I think the President's announcement was a good announcement. And I'm nonpartisan. I thought Reagan's massive rate agreement and the Montreal Protocol with President Reagan was good announcements too, so consistent with clean air and clean water, and now I better get off the stage. Thank you very much.
Job is to, first of all, I'll vote for you. I can't top that, although I did learn a couple things, Ambassador. Now we understand you were a liquor commissioner in Manitoba, and my favorite, though, you were on the board of directors of the Blue Bombers. That's fabulous. Thank you for very thoughtful remarks, very enlightening. I have a gift I'm going to give you. Before I do that, I just wanted to say to my friends here that years ago, he alluded to this, I took a train, my wife and I, Janet, we took a train all across Canada. By the way, you're going to hear from our ambassador in the morning, and I'm going to have the privilege of introducing David Jacobson. And I'm looking forward to that. David Jacobson actually outdid us in the traveling around. He went up to the territories. I was smart. I went back to Ottawa and drank beer, but anyway. But we took this train all across the country, and it was really basically from St. John's, Newfoundland to Victoria, British Columbia, to see the country, to meet with everybody. But what was interesting was in between Toronto and Winnipeg, it was 28 hours. I thought I'd seen every rock and lake, and welcome to the Canadian Shield. So we arrived in Winnipeg. Our Consul General said to me, we want, of course, you're going to meet in every province with the Premier, the Leader of Opposition, the Mayor, the editorial board, the talk show, doing all that. But he said, what's really interesting about Manitoba is the guy I really want you to meet, the Premier's a good man, but we really want you to meet with the Leader of Opposition because he's really going places. I said, the Leader of Opposition? Well, what's his name? Gary Doer. What a doer! Thank you for being with us tonight. We have a gift for you.